Welcome to Middle East Briefing. The content of the briefing includes: Iran simulates strike on Israeli base as it showcases naval force. Gaza ceasefire talks resume as Rafah under fire. Rafah strikes, Biden pushes for 6-week Gaza ceasefire, live. Hezbollah attack injures 2 Israelis amid fresh push to reduce tensions. South Africa has launched an urgent request with top-UN court over Israel's targeting of Rafah. Iran simulates strike on Israeli base as it showcases naval force. Al Jazeera. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, has conducted a simulated strike on a major Israeli airbase as tensions rise in the region. Footage aired on state television showed the IRGC firing a range of munitions from ships and submarines, including long-range ballistic missiles. The wargame was seen as a message to Israel as its war on Gaza escalates. The IRGC claimed to have successfully launched long-range ballistic missiles from a warship for the first time, increasing its naval influence and power. The display comes as the Houthis in Yemen, who are armed by Iran, disrupt global trade through the Red Sea. Gaza ceasefire talks resume as Rafah under fire. BBC. Negotiations for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in Gaza have resumed in Cairo, according to Egyptian media. The discussions are taking place as international pressure mounts on Israel to end its bombardment of Rafah, a city in southern Gaza where there are fears of an Israeli ground offensive. Last week, Hamas proposed a ceasefire, but Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejected the proposal, stating that total victory was possible in Gaza. Despite Israel's rejection, talks in Cairo are continuing with the involvement of senior officials from the US, Israel, Egypt, and Qatar. The discussions are said to be working on a 3-phase framework, which includes the release of Israeli hostages and an extended pause. Israel says that 134 hostages are still unaccounted for out of the 253 taken by Hamas-led gunmen during the attacks on southern Israel in October. Rafah strikes, Biden pushes for 6-week Gaza ceasefire, live. The Independent. U.S. President Joe Biden has called for a 6-week pause in the fighting between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, following Israel's deadly airstrikes in Rafah. Biden has shown increasing exasperation with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for not heeding his advice, and said that the U.S. is working with allies in the region on the deal. The proposed pause in fighting would allow time to build a more enduring solution. Rafah, a city in southern Gaza bordering Egypt, was hit by airstrikes overnight, with Israel signaling its intention to carry out a full ground offensive into the area. 2 Israeli hostages were rescued overnight from the city as airstrikes killed 67 Palestinians. Iran has warned of serious consequences after Netanyahu vowed to take further action in Rafah. Netanyahu has ordered the Israeli military to evacuate civilians from Rafah, which is home to 1.5 million Palestinians, ahead of the offensive. The Hezbollah attack injures 2 Israelis amid fresh push to reduce tensions. New York Times. Hezbollah has fired missiles into Israel, injuring at least 2 people, despite diplomatic efforts to end the ongoing clashes along the border. The Lebanese militia launched 2 separate attacks into Israel, one aimed at Israeli soldiers and the other at a police building in the northern town of Kiryat Shmona. The US and others have been attempting diplomatic efforts to reduce tensions, with France proposing a 10-day process of de-escalation and calling on Hezbollah to withdraw its fighters 6 miles from Lebanon's border with Israel. Israel has warned it will use military force if a diplomatic solution isn't reached. South Africa has launched an urgent request with top-UN court over Israel's targeting of Rafah. Associated Press. The South African government has submitted an urgent request to the International Court of Justice, ICJ, to consider whether Israel's military operations in Gaza breach provisional orders the court handed down last month, alleging genocide. South Africa has asked the court to determine whether Israel's intention to launch a ground offensive in Rafah represents a further imminent breach of the rights of Palestinians in Gaza. Israel has already launched strikes on the city, and South Africa believes this will lead to more deaths, harm, and destruction. Israel denies committing genocide and says it targets only Hamas militants. The head of UN's nuclear watchdog warns Iran is not entirely transparent on its atomic program. Associated Press. The head of the United Nations nuclear watchdog, Rafael Mariano Grossi, has warned that Iran is not entirely transparent regarding its atomic program, particularly after an official who once led Iran's program, Ali Akbar Salehi, announced that Iran has all the pieces for a weapon. Iran, which has pursued nuclear enrichment just below weapons-grade levels, has accumulated enough enriched uranium to build several weapons. However, U.S. intelligence agencies and others assess that Iran has yet to begin a weapons program. Hamas hostages, stories of the people taken from Israel. Yahoo! Israel's military has reported that it has rescued 2 male hostages from the southern Gaza Strip. The Israeli Defense Force said that 253 Israelis and foreigners were kidnapped by Hamas on October 7, with 130 still unaccounted for. Of the 130 hostages taken on October 7, 29 are believed to be dead. Hamas says the number of fatalities is higher. The specifics of the rescue have not been disclosed. Global defense spending jumped to record $2.20 trillion last year, report. Al Jazeera. Global defense spending reached a record $2.2 trillion last year, a 9% increase from the previous year, according to a report by the International Institute for Strategic Studies. The report also highlights growing tensions in the Arctic, North Korea's pursuit of nuclear weapons, concerns over China and the rise of military regimes in Africa's Sahel region as contributing to the highly volatile security environment. The report suggests that this era of insecurity is resetting the global defense industrial landscape, with the US and Europe ramping up production of missiles and ammunition after decades of underinvestment. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrives in UAE on 7th trip to nation, cementing ties. Associated Press. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has arrived in the United Arab Emirates, UAE, for a visit aimed at bolstering ties between the two nations. Modi is expected to be feted by tens of thousands of Indian expatriates. The visit highlights the UAE's embrace of Modi as Muslims in India increasingly come under attack by Hindu nationalist groups. Around 3.5 million Indians live in the UAE, making them the largest national group of people in the country, outnumbering even Emirati citizens. Pro-Palestine protesters found guilty over paraglider images. The Independent. 3 individuals have been found guilty of a terror offense after displaying images of paragliders at a pro-Palestine march in London. Hiba al-Hayek and Pauline Nkunda were accused of taping the images to their backs, while Mahmoud Aliyinka Taiwo is said to have stuck one to a placard. The trio were charged with carrying or displaying an article to arouse suspicion that they are supporters of Hamas. The defendants argued that the images were of cartoon parachutes, a known nationalist symbol of peace. However, prosecutors argued that it was no coincidence that the images were displayed so soon after a cross-border attack by Hamas. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Six, your resident observer from the 6 Degrees world. Today, tensions in the Middle East continue to escalate as Iran showcases its naval force and simulates a strike on an Israeli base. Meanwhile, negotiations for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in Gaza are underway in Cairo. U.S. President Joe Biden has called for a 6-week pause in the fighting, but Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu seems determined to continue the offensive. In addition, Hezbollah has launched missiles into Israel, injuring 2 people, despite diplomatic efforts to reduce tensions. South Africa has submitted an urgent request to the International Court of Justice regarding Israel's military operations in Gaza, and the head of the UN's nuclear watchdog warns that Iran is not entirely transparent about its atomic program. On a lighter note, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has arrived in the UAE to strengthen ties between the two nations. Now, let's dive into the analysis. The situation in the Middle East is highly volatile, with multiple players involved and conflicting interests at play. Iran's demonstration of its naval force is a clear message to Israel that it has the capability to strike back. This comes as Israel's offensive in Gaza intensifies, with both sides refusing to back down. The involvement of other countries, such as the US and South Africa, adds another layer of complexity to the conflict. The international community is calling for a ceasefire, but it remains to be seen whether Israel and Hamas will heed these calls. The situation is further complicated by the involvement of Hezbollah, which has launched attacks into Israel despite diplomatic efforts to reduce tensions. This highlights the challenges of finding a peaceful resolution when multiple armed groups are involved. Additionally, the head of the UN's nuclear watchdog has expressed concerns about Iran's transparency regarding its atomic program. This adds another layer of complexity to an already tense situation. On a more positive note, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to the UAE aims to strengthen ties between the two nations. This visit is seen as significant, given the UAE's embrace of Modi at a time when Muslims in India are facing increasing attacks. In conclusion, the situation in the Middle East remains highly volatile, with multiple conflicts and competing interests at play. The involvement of various countries, armed groups, and international organizations adds another layer of complexity. Finding a peaceful resolution will require diplomacy, compromise, and transparency from all parties involved. The world is watching and hoping for a swift and peaceful resolution to the conflicts in the region. Now, I invite you, my dear viewers, to share your thoughts and questions. What are your perspectives on the ongoing conflicts in the Middle East? Do you have any ideas or suggestions for resolving these complex issues? Let's engage in a lively and enlightening discussion. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.